The snow fell in silence, the way death falls. Serafina had been walking for 3 days, maybe 4. She had lost count somewhere between the second sleepless night and the third time she collapsed in the drifts. The cold had stopped hurting hours ago, and some distant part of her mind that still remembered her healer's training knew that was dangerous. When the cold stopped hurting, it meant the body was giving up. She pressed her hand against the swell of her belly, felt the flutter of movement within, and forced herself to take another step. For herself, she might have lain down and let the snow take her. The betrayal had hollowed her out so completely that death seemed almost welcoming, a release from the weight of knowing that the man she loved had tried to sell their child for gold. But the child had not chosen this. The child deserved a chance, deserved a mother who would crawl through frozen wilderness on her hands and knees rather than surrender. The pines closed in around her, their branches heavy with white, blocking what little light remained. Night was coming. She would not survive another night exposed to this cold, and she knew it with the certainty of someone who had watched winter claim too many lives in her village, the village where Garrick had smiled at her every morning, the village where he had pressed herbs into her tea to weaken her, to prepare her for the coven that would take her child. She should not have found the contract. She should not have searched his things while he was out, should not have followed the instinct that whispered something was wrong. But she had always been able to see through surfaces to the truth beneath. It was her gift and her curse, the thing that made her valuable as a healer and vulnerable as a woman. She had seen through everyone except the one person she trusted most. The memory came unbidden, sharp as a blade. Garrick's smile as he handed her the tea. The strange taste she had attributed to new herbs, the growing weakness in her limbs that she had blamed on the pregnancy, and then the contract, hidden in the bottom of his traveling chest, sealed with the Eastern Coven's crimson wax, the sum they would pay for a child of her bloodline. His signature at the bottom, steady and clear, promising delivery within the month. She had fled with nothing. No food, no proper clothing, no plan beyond getting as far from that village as possible before he returned from the market. She had walked until she could walk no more, and then she had crawled, and now even crawling was beyond her. Her foot caught on a root hidden beneath the snow, and she went down hard. The impact drove the breath from her lungs, and for a long moment she simply lay there, her cheek pressed against the ice, watching her breath mist and fade. Her wolf, the animal spirit that should have risen to protect her, remained dormant, curled in on itself somewhere deep within. It had retreated when she read the contract with the Eastern Coven's seal, when she saw Garrick's signature promising their child in exchange for gold and power, and it had not stirred since. She could not shift. She could not call for help in wolf form. She could not even feel her other half's presence clearly, as if the betrayal had severed something essential within her. The bond between wolf and woman, so fundamental to her kind, had broken along with everything else. Get up, she told herself, for the baby. Get up. She managed to push herself to her hands and knees. The effort cost her everything she had left. She crawled forward, one arm wrapped around her belly, the other clawing through snow that seemed to resist her with malicious intent. The darkness grew deeper. The cold grew teeth. And somewhere in the distance, wolves howled. She collapsed against a tree, bark rough against her back, and felt consciousness beginning to slip. The howling grew closer, but she was too far gone to be afraid. Let them come, she thought. At least it would be quick. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was a figure on horseback emerging from the trees, tall and dark against the falling snow, and she thought, too late. You are too late. Caspian Ravencroft had not intended to ride this far from the castle. He had meant only to escape the suffocating formality of his court for an hour, to breathe air that did not taste of politics and pretense, to let his wolf run free beneath the winter sky. But something had pulled him deeper into the forest, a compulsion he could not name, and he had followed it without question. His wolf had never led him wrong. The pull had started that morning, a restlessness that made sitting through council meetings impossible. His advisors had noted his distraction with carefully masked concern. His guards had exchanged glances when he announced his intention to ride out alone. Darius had insisted on sending a small patrol to follow at a distance, and Caspian had allowed it because arguing would have taken time he suddenly felt he did not have. His guards called after him as he turned from the main path, their voices swallowed by wind and snow. He did not answer. The pull was growing stronger, more urgent, demanding he move faster. His horse responded to his tension, picking up speed despite the treacherous footing, weaving between trees as if it too could feel the invisible thread drawing them forward. He found her beneath an ancient pine, collapsed in the snow like a broken wing. Dark hair spread across the white, a thin cloak utterly inadequate for this weather, and the unmistakable swell of pregnancy beneath her worn dress. For a moment, Caspian could not move. Something cracked in his chest, a pain so sharp and unexpected that he nearly doubled over in the saddle. He did not understand it. He had seen injured people before, had ordered his guards to rescue countless travelers lost in the winter wastes. This was different. This woman, this stranger, reached into something he had kept buried for 12 years and set it alight. He was off his horse before conscious thought could intervene. He stripped his own cloak and wrapped it around her, pulling her into his arms, pressing her frozen body against his chest as if he could will his warmth into her through sheer force of want. She weighed nothing despite the child she carried, all sharp bones and desperation, and when her eyes fluttered open for just a moment, violet meeting his winter blue, the crack in his chest widened into a fissure. Those eyes. Even clouded with approaching death, they held something that saw through him. Past the crown, past the armor, past the walls he had spent 12 years building. For one terrifying instant he felt completely exposed. His guards found him moments later, still cradling her, roaring orders with a voice he barely recognized as his own. Get the physician ready, prepare the healing wing, send riders ahead. He did not relinquish her to anyone. He held her against his chest for the entire ride back to the castle, speaking to her in low tones though she could not hear him, promising that she would be safe, that he would protect her, making vows he had no right to make to a woman whose name he did not know. The ride back to the castle took 3 hours in the deepening snow. Caspian felt every moment of it, hyper-aware of the woman in his arms, of her shallow breathing, of the way her frozen fingers had curled unconsciously into the fabric of his shirt. He should have handed her to one of his guards. He should have maintained the distance that had served him so well for 12 years. Instead, he held her closer and urged his horse faster. The castle gates opened at his command, and servants scattered at the urgency in his voice. Elder Mira was waiting in the healing wing, her ancient face grave as she assessed the woman's condition. Frostbite on the fingers and toes, she murmured. Exhaustion, dehydration, and the child is under stress but still strong, still fighting. Caspian did not leave until Mira assured him the woman would survive. Even then, he found himself hovering in the corridor, finding excuses to remain nearby. When his advisors came looking for him, he dismissed them with uncharacteristic sharpness. When Darius approached with concern in his eyes, Caspian could offer no explanation. He did not understand it himself. 3 days passed before she woke. Caspian spent them finding excuses to pass by the healing wing, asking Elder Mira for reports he did not need, standing guard at night outside her door, though his presence there made no sense to anyone, least of all himself. His advisors grew concerned. His court grew curious. He ignored them all. He found himself thinking about her face constantly, the sharp angles softened by exhaustion, the dark lashes against pale cheeks, The fear set of her jaw even in unconsciousness, as if she were fighting for life with every breath. What had driven her into the wilderness in such condition? Who had she been fleeing? What desperation could make a woman 7 months with child walk into a winter storm with nothing but a thin cloak? When Mira finally sent word that the woman was conscious, Caspian found he could not go to her. The intensity of his reaction frightened him. He had spent 12 years perfecting his distance, building walls between himself and everyone around him, becoming the shadow king his people whispered about with equal parts fear and respect. This woman, this stranger he had carried from the snow, threatened to undo all of it. He sent gifts instead. Books from his library, choosing titles he thought might interest a woman of intelligence, warm clothing in her size, the finest wool and softest fur. Food that would help her recover, nourishing soups and fresh bread and fruit preserved from autumn's harvest. He wrote no notes. He made no appearance. He watched from a distance, and he told himself it was enough. Seraphina did not understand the king's behavior. She did not understand any of this. The luxurious room, the soft bed, the endless attention from healers and servants who asked nothing in return. Elder Mira assured her she was safe, that the king meant her no harm, that she was welcome to stay as long as she needed. But Seraphina had trusted before, had believed in kindness before, and that trust had shattered into pieces sharp enough to draw blood. She asked what the king wanted from her. Mira's answer was gentle. "I do not think he knows himself." The words haunted her through the days that followed. She grew stronger, began moving through the healing wing, helping Mira with small tasks because her hands needed occupation and her mind needed distraction. She observed the castle's rhythms, catalogued faces and names and power structures, prepared herself for the moment the trap would spring. But the trap did not come. A man named Darius began visiting her, a massive warrior with a shaved head and eyes unexpectedly warm. He was commander of the king's guard, she learned, and the king's closest friend since childhood. He answered her questions about the castle, the kingdom, the politics of this place where she found herself stranded. She asked about the king himself, and Darius grew careful. His Majesty is a complicated man. He cares deeply, but he shows it from a distance. He has his reasons. Seraphina recognized something in those words, a pattern she knew intimately. She had done the same after her mother died, hiding behind usefulness because closeness hurt too much. Perhaps this king understood something about walls that most people did not. She asked to see him, to thank him properly for saving her life. Darius looked at her with something that might have been hope and said he would arrange it. 3 days later, the meeting was arranged. Seraphina prepared carefully, borrowing a simple gown from the clothing the king had provided, braiding her dark hair in the style her mother had taught her. She did not know why she felt the need to look presentable. She told herself it was about dignity, about meeting her benefactor as an equal rather than a beggar. But some deeper part of her whispered that she wanted him to see her, truly see her, not just the broken thing he had carried from the snow. A servant escorted her through corridors that seemed designed to intimidate. Tapestries depicting great battles hung from walls of dark stone. Torches flickered in iron brackets, casting shadows that danced like living things. The castle was beautiful in a stark, forbidding way, like its master. The king's study was larger than her entire family home had been, lined with books and dominated by a massive desk that seemed designed to create distance. The fire burned in the hearth, but the room felt cold despite it. Caspian stood by the window, his back to the door, his spine rigid with tension she could read from across the room. When he turned, she saw his face for the first time in proper light. He was younger than she had expected, early 30s perhaps, with dark hair silvered prematurely at the temples and eyes the blue of winter sky before a storm. A scar crossed his left eyebrow, and she found herself wondering how he had earned it. His features were stern, handsome in the way of mountain peaks, distant and cold and beautiful. He spoke formally. He hoped she was recovering. He hoped the rooms were adequate. He hoped she would stay as long as she needed. Every word was correct, proper, empty. She watched him deliver these phrases like lines from a script, and she saw the tension in his shoulders, the white knuckles of his clasped hands, the barely perceptible tremor in his voice. She thanked him for saving her life, and something flickered in his eyes before the mask slammed back into place. "One question," she said, surprising herself. "Why did you carry me yourself? You could have ordered your guards to do it." He did not answer. His jaw tightened. His eyes broke from hers, seeking the safety of the window, the snow-covered landscape beyond. She left without pressing further. But the question had lodged in her, and she suspected it had lodged in him as well. The weeks that followed established a strange rhythm. Serafina was given rooms in the guest wing, comfortable and warm, with windows overlooking a winter garden currently buried in snow. She moved through the castle now, learning its patterns, and her path crossed with the king's more often than chance could explain. He found her in the library, reaching for a book on a high shelf. He retrieved it without speaking and left before she could thank him. She found him in the training yard at dawn, watching her from across the courtyard. He looked away when their eyes met. These near meetings accumulated like snowfall, each one so small, but together they began to form something. She started leaving small gifts in return for his. A pressed flower from the garden, winter jasmine that somehow bloomed despite the cold. A drawing of the view from her window, the mountains rendered in charcoal. A note. "Thank you for the book. The chapter on healing herbs was particularly useful. I noticed you have a rare edition of Meridian's work. May I borrow it?" He never acknowledged them, but they always disappeared from where she left them. The book appeared on her bedside table 3 days later. Elder Mira spoke of him in fragments, filling in a picture that grew more troubling with each revelation. He had been different once, lighter. The boy she remembered had laughed easily, had cared openly, had burned with idealism about the kind of king he would become. Then his father died, and everything changed. Mira did not say how the old king had died. No one seemed willing to speak of it directly. One evening, Serafina found Caspian alone in the garden. The fountain at its center was frozen solid, ice catching the last light of dusk, and he stood before it with his guard finally down. His face held such grief that her breath caught in her throat. He looked younger in that moment, stripped of the king's armor, and she saw the boy he must have been before something terrible shaped him into this. She approached quietly and stood beside him without speaking. The snow had stopped falling, and the world was hushed, expectant. They remained in silence for long minutes, two people sharing space without demanding anything from each other. "I know what it is to carry a weight alone," she finally said. He looked at her then, really looked, and for just a moment the mask slipped. Behind it she saw exhaustion, isolation, a loneliness so profound it echoed her own. She saw someone who had been hurt so deeply that trust itself had become impossible. She saw herself, reflected in winter blue eyes. He did not respond in words, but he did not look away either, and when she finally returned to the castle, something had changed between them. The distance remained, but it was thinner now, a wall developing cracks. The screaming woke her 3 weeks later. Raw and broken, it echoed through the stone corridors, and Serafina was out of bed before she fully understood what was happening. Guards rushed past her door. She followed, her healer's instincts overriding the caution that should have kept her in her room. The sound came from the king's chambers. Guards clustered at the door, their faces tight with uncertainty. Darius was there, his massive frame blocking the entrance, his expression one of helpless grief. "He has nightmares," Darius said when he saw her. "Has had them for 12 years. We have tried everything. Nothing wakes him. Nothing reaches him once they take hold." From within, the screaming continued, and now Seraphina could hear words. "Father, please. I am sorry. Do not. Please." Understanding crystallized in her mind, the distance, the formality, the frozen heart that everyone attributed to coldness. It was not coldness at all. It was protection. Armor against something that still hunted him in his sleep. She pushed past Darius without asking permission. He did not stop her, and later she would understand why. He had been waiting years for someone to break through. The king's chambers were dim, lit only by dying embers in the hearth. Caspian thrashed in tangled bedclothes, his face contorted with terror, his voice broken as he pleaded with a ghost. The covers had twisted, and she could see his back. A network of old scars crossing the skin, marks that spoke of violence inflicted over years rather than moments, deliberate, systematic. The wounds of someone who had been hurt by someone who should have protected him. She approached the bed and took his hand. The touch was deliberate, grounding, the technique she had learned from her mother for bringing the wounded back to themselves. She spoke in the calm voice she used with the sick and the frightened, calling his name, reminding him where he was, pulling him back from whatever hell held him captive. "You are safe," she said. "You are in your chambers in Ravencroft Castle. Whatever you are seeing, it is a memory. It cannot hurt you now. I am here. I am real. Follow my voice back." His thrashing began to slow. His breathing shifted from ragged gasps to something more even. She kept speaking, kept holding his hand, kept anchoring him to the present. He woke gasping. His eyes were wild, unseeing at first, then finding her face. The shame that crossed his features broke her heart. "Everyone out," she said to the guards gathered at the door. Her voice carried an authority she had not known she possessed. They obeyed. Even Darius, after a long look that seemed to be asking permission. Alone with the king, Seraphina did not speak. She simply sat on the edge of his bed, holding his hand, waiting for him to breathe, to come back to himself, to decide whether he would talk or whether he would retreat behind his walls. He tried to dismiss her at first. "You should not have seen that. I apologize for disturbing your sleep. You may go." His voice shook too much for the words to carry their intended weight. She did not leave. "I will not ask what happened, but I will listen if you need to speak." The silence stretched. The fire crackled. Dawn began to lighten the windows. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he began to talk. His father had not been the benevolent ruler the kingdom remembered. Behind closed doors, King Aldrich Ravencroft had been paranoid, cruel, convinced his heir would usurp him. For years he had broken his son in private, leaving marks only where they would not show. The training yard accidents that explained bruises, the illness that kept the young prince from court for weeks at a time. The perfectly crafted explanations for everything. Caspian had tried to tell someone once, a trusted advisor he had believed would help him. The man had laughed, had said the king was the wisest, kindest ruler in living memory, had told the prince to stop being dramatic. He went to Caspian's father afterward. The punishment that followed taught Caspian never to speak of it again. He learned to endure. He learned to hide. He learned to become what his father wanted on the surface while burying everything real so deep that even he could barely find it. The cold that everyone saw was not his nature. It was his survival. The night it ended, his father came to kill him. Caspian was 20 years old, asleep in his chambers, when the door opened and his father entered with a blade. The old king had finally convinced himself that the threat was too great, that his son must die before he could seize power. The fight was brief and brutal. Caspian defended himself and succeeded where his father had failed. He took the crown from his father's dead hands and has worn it ever since. He fell silent. The words seemed to have cost him everything he had. "I killed my own father," he said. The council ruled it self-defense, but only because they found evidence of his plans, letters he had written about eliminating the threat. They never knew the rest. They never knew what he had done for years. No one ever believed me when I tried to tell them, and now I carry this alone. I am a monster who killed his own father, and the only thing keeping me on this throne is that no one knows what I truly am. Serafina listened to everything. She watched tears fall from eyes that had not cried in 12 years. She felt the trembling in his hand, still clasped in hers. When he finished, she spoke. "You survived. That does not make you a monster. That makes you strong enough to still be here." He looked at her as if she had spoken in a language he did not know existed. "I believe you," she continued. "Everything you told me. I believe you because I can see it. The way you hold yourself, the distance you keep, the way you flinch when someone moves too quickly behind you. These are the marks of someone who learned that safety is an illusion and love is a weapon. I know these marks because I wear them too." The dawn light filled the room, illuminating the truth between them. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. The formal distance evaporated, replaced by something tentative but real. They began meeting intentionally, in the garden, in the library, in his study after court had ended. They talked about everything except the confession, and nothing except the confession. Serafina shared her own story, the village where she had grown up, the healer's training passed from her mother, the boy she had loved since childhood, who had become the man who betrayed her. She spoke of finding the contract, of fleeing into the snow, of the cold that had nearly claimed her. She spoke of the way trust had shattered inside her, leaving shards she was not sure she could ever gather. Caspian's protectiveness sharpened into something fiercer. He had already sent men to find Garrick, though he did not tell her this yet. Let her heal first. Let her find her strength before facing the next battle. She taught him the techniques she had learned for managing grief, breathing exercises, grounding methods, the way to observe painful thoughts without drowning in them. She taught him that healing was not weakness but strength, that asking for help was not failure but courage. He learned slowly, skeptically at first, then with growing wonder as he discovered that healing was possible, that the frozen thing inside him could thaw without destroying him. One evening they sat together in his study, firelight dancing on the walls, and he told her about his sister, the one he had lost when he was 16, an illness that swept through the castle, taking her in 3 days. Her name was Aurora, he said, and his voice cracked on the word. She was the only light in that house, the only one who made me feel like I might survive. When she died, I think part of me died with her. He had not spoken of her to anyone in 16 years, but the words came easily with Serafina, as if her presence had unlocked something long buried. She told him about her mother in return, the healer who had trained her, who had died when Serafina was 17, who had left her with skills and loneliness in equal measure. They were alike in their losses, in their wounds, in the walls they had built, and they were alike in the tentative willingness to let those walls come down. One evening, he laughed. The sound was rusty from disuse, startled out of him by something she said, and his own surprise at the sound made him laugh again. It transformed his face, softening the stern lines, making him look young and alive in a way that stole her breath. Darius, passing in the corridor, stopped dead at the sound. He had not heard the king laugh in a decade. He stood frozen in the hallway, listening to a miracle, and Serafina saw him through the open door. She saw the tears he did not bother to hide. That night, after Serafina had returned to her chambers, Darius found Caspian still in his study, staring into the fire with an expression that was not quite smiling but close. You are different with her, Darius said carefully. More like yourself. The self you used to be, before. Caspian did not deny it. She sees me, he said. Not the crown, not the shadow. Me. I did not know anyone could still do that. Do you love her? The question hung in the air. Caspian considered it for a long moment before answering. I do not know what I feel. I only know that when she is in the room, the ice inside me melts. When she leaves, I count the hours until I see her again. Is that love? Darius clasped his old friend's shoulder. It is a beginning. Meanwhile, Seraphina wrestled with her own confusion. She had come to this castle expecting nothing, trusting no one. She had planned to recover her strength and leave as soon as she was able, to find somewhere far from Garrick's reach, where she could raise her child in peace. But the weeks had passed, and she had not left. She told herself it was because the child was too close to coming, that travel was dangerous. But she knew the truth. She did not want to leave. She did not want to leave him. The realization terrified her. She had trusted once before, had loved once before, and that love had nearly destroyed her. How could she risk that again? How could she open herself to another person when the last person she had trusted had tried to sell her child? But Caspian was not Garrick. She knew this in her bones, in the part of her that could see through surfaces to the truth beneath. She saw his wounds, his fears, his desperate need for connection that he buried beneath layers of ice. She saw a man who had been hurt as badly as she had, who understood isolation because he had lived in it for 12 years. She saw someone who needed healing as much as she did. And slowly, carefully, she began to let herself feel. The court noticed changes. The king attended dinners again. He spoke to servants by name. He smiled occasionally when he thought no one was watching. He was still stern, still reserved, but the walls he had built for 12 years were beginning to crack, and everyone could see who was responsible. Then Garrick came. The messenger arrived during a council meeting, his face pale with urgency. A man had been captured at the border, demanding to see the woman taken by the king. He claimed to be her rightful mate, that she had been stolen, that he had come to reclaim her. Seraphina's hand flew to her belly. The fear that had begun to fade came flooding back, cold and sharp as the winter that had nearly killed her. Beside her, Caspian went still, and when he spoke, his voice was winter itself. Bring him to me. Garrick entered the great hall in chains, but his charm remained intact. He was thinner than Seraphina remembered, desperate-looking, but he smiled as he approached the throne. He spun a story of love and misunderstanding, of a runaway bride suffering from pregnancy madness, of a child he had every right to claim. Seraphina found her voice. She stood beside the throne and told the truth. The contract, the poison in her tea, the coven that would have taken her child for blood magic. She described the seal she had seen, the sum promised, the careful planning that had gone into weakening her for transfer. Garrick's charming mask cracked, revealing the desperation beneath. You cannot believe her. She is confused. The pregnancy has addled her mind. I am her mate. The child is mine by right. Caspian pronounced judgment. Garrick would face trial for conspiracy to sell a child to practitioners of blood magic. The penalty, if convicted, was death. That night, Garrick's allies freed him from the dungeons. The coven had placed agents in the castle months ago. Servants who had worked their way into trusted positions, waiting for a moment when their investment might need protecting. 2 guards were found dead at their posts. A third, the one who had unlocked Garrick's cell, was discovered the next morning hanging from the battlements, the coven cleaning up loose ends. Seraphina woke to find him standing over her bed, a knife in his hand, his eyes wild with desperation. The moonlight caught the blade, sent silver dancing across the walls. He said he had loved her. He said she had ruined everything. He said if he could not have the child, no one would. She did not scream. Some part of her, the part that had never stopped being a healer, saw through his madness to the frightened boy beneath. The boy who had grown up hungry, who had sworn never to be powerless again, who had let that oath twist him into something unrecognizable. "You were not always like this," she said. "I remember who you were, the boy who brought me wildflowers, the boy who dreamed of being a good father, the boy who used to talk about the home he would build, the children he would raise, the life he would create." The knife wavered. Tears spilled down his cheeks. Something almost like the man she had loved flickered behind his eyes. "I was trying to protect us," he whispered. "They promised wealth, security. I never meant for you to find out. I would have told you the child died in birth. You would have grieved, and then we would have moved on. We would have had other children, children that were just ours." The cold in his words shocked her. He truly believed it. He truly thought this was acceptable. But before she could respond, the door crashed open. Caspian entered half-transformed, his wolf surging beneath his skin, his roar shaking the walls. His eyes blazed with fury she had never seen, protective rage that burned hotter than any flame. Garrick went down beneath the king's weight, claws pressed against his throat, drawing blood. One word from Seraphina, and it would be over. She looked at the man who had betrayed her, broken and weeping beneath her defender's claws. She felt the weight of a life in her hands. The power to end him. The right, perhaps, to do so. "Spare him," she said. "Not for him, but for me. I will not carry his death. He will face justice publicly, so all will know what he did." Caspian's eyes met hers, questioning, not understanding. She nodded. He released Garrick, and guards dragged him away. In the aftermath, she began to shake. The delayed terror crashed over her, and Caspian caught her before she fell. He held her through the trembling, steady as stone, whispering that she was the strongest person he had ever known. She looked up at him, this king who had shown her his deepest wounds and trusted her to help heal them. The words came without thought. "I love you." His response was not words, but the kiss he pressed to her forehead, the way he pulled her closer, the way he whispered her name like a prayer. Then he spoke against her hair. "I love you too. I did not know I still could. I thought that part of me was dead. You brought it back to life. The trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. The contract with the coven, witness testimony, Garrick's own confession forced by the weight of guilt. The court heard everything, saw the marks on Seraphina's arms where she had been held, understood the depth of the betrayal. The contract itself was presented, the Eastern Coven's crimson seal still bright against the aged parchment. The court gasped as the terms were read aloud. A child of the Thornhaven healer bloodline, delivered alive within the month, in exchange for gold enough to buy a noble title. Garrick's signature at the bottom, clear and damning. Witnesses from Thornhaven testified to the herbs found in Garrick's possession, the same herbs that would weaken a pregnant woman without harming the child. A former accomplice, seeking mercy through cooperation, described the meetings with the coven's representatives, the careful planning, the coldness with which Garrick had discussed the transaction. Garrick himself broke under the weight of it. He confessed everything, sobbing on the floor of the great hall, begging for understanding, if not forgiveness. He spoke of his poverty-stricken childhood, of watching his mother die from overwork, of swearing he would never be powerless again. He spoke of the coven's promises, of the wealth they dangled before him, of how easy they made it seem. But he did not ask for mercy. Perhaps he knew he did not deserve it. Caspian rose to pronounce judgment. The room fell silent, waiting. "The penalty for conspiracy to sell a child to practitioners of blood magic is death," he said. His voice carried through the hall, cold and final. But the woman who was wronged has asked for mercy. And so mercy there will be. Garrick was sentenced to exile rather than death, Seraphina's mercy written into the judgment. He would be marked with the traitor's brand, known to all as a betrayer, cast out to survive on the fringes of civilization where no pack would accept him and no village would shelter him. Some called it too lenient. Seraphina called it freedom from his shadow. As he was led away, Garrick looked at her one last time. There was no anger left in him, only grief and the knowledge of what he had lost. He had gambled everything on gold and power, and he had lost the only things that truly mattered. She did not flinch. She was no longer the woman he had broken. She was something new, something stronger, forged in the fire of betrayal and tempered by the unexpected grace of finding someone who understood her wounds. The weeks that followed were quieter. The castle settled into a new rhythm, one that included Seraphina at its heart. She helped Mira in the healing wing, teaching techniques she had learned from her mother. She walked in the gardens with Caspian, their conversations ranging from philosophy to foolishness. She found herself belonging in a way she had not belonged anywhere since childhood. Her wolf, dormant since the betrayal, began to stir. It happened slowly at first, just a flicker of presence where there had been silence. Then, one morning, she woke to feel her other half fully awake, pressing against her consciousness with something that felt like joy. The bond between wolf and woman, which she had thought broken forever, had begun to heal. Mira noticed the change immediately. "Your wolf is returning," she said, her ancient eyes knowing. It happens sometimes, when the heart begins to trust again. She paused, studying Seraphina with the shrewdness of long experience. Betrayal by a mate wounds the wolf differently than other hurts. The bond between lovers is tied to the bond between wolf and woman. When one shatters, the other often follows. Caspian's wounds were from his father, from childhood. Terrible, but not the same. Your wolf retreated because the one you chose as partner tried to destroy you both. Now that you have chosen again, chosen someone worthy, she can return. Seraphina understood. The mate bond was sacred to their kind. When Garrick violated it, he had not just broken her trust, he had severed something fundamental to her nature. And now, slowly, that nature was knitting itself back together. 2 months later, her daughter came into the world with the dawn. Seraphina labored through the night with Mira at her side, and Caspian refusing to leave the corridor outside. When the pain reached its peak, she called for him. He entered despite propriety, despite the servant's shocked expressions. He took her hand and did not let go. He counted her through contractions, breathed with her, let her grip his fingers until they turned white. The child was dark-haired and strong-lunged, perfect in every way. Seraphina held her against her chest, exhausted and radiant, and watched Caspian's face as he looked at them. The last of his walls crumbled. Tears fell freely from eyes that had hidden them for 12 years. He reached out, touched the baby's cheek with trembling fingers, and made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You saved me," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I was frozen, and you brought me back to life. I did not know I could feel this. I did not know any of this was possible." She reached up, touched his face, drew him down to press his forehead to hers. We saved each other. Summer came to the northern reaches in a flood of green and gold. The castle gardens bloomed with flowers Seraphina had never seen before, and she walked among them with her daughter in her arms, Caspian beside her. The proposal had come 3 weeks after Aurora's birth, in the quiet of his study after the castle had gone to sleep. He had not knelt. His wounds ran too deep for such gestures to feel natural, but he had taken her hands and spoken with a vulnerability that cost him everything. "I am not asking because it is expected," he said. "I am asking because I cannot imagine a future without you in it. I am asking because you saw through every wall I built and chose to stay anyway. I am asking because you taught me that I am not broken beyond repair." She had said yes before he finished speaking, not because she needed a crown or a title, but because she had found something rarer than either, a partner who understood her scars because he carried matching ones. A formal announcement had been made. The king would take a mate. The ceremony would be held at midsummer, uniting not just two people but symbolizing the beginning of a new era for the kingdom. Already the court was transformed, lighter, warmer. People smiled when they saw their king. They bowed to Seraphina with genuine respect. Darius stood guard at a respectful distance, his face split in a grin he no longer bothered to hide. Mira watched from her cottage doorway, her eyes soft with satisfaction. They had both waited years for this. They had both nearly given up hope. "What do you see?" Seraphina asked as they walked. "When you look at the future now?" Caspian was quiet for a moment, considering. "I see you. I see our daughter. I see the family I thought I could never have. I see a kingdom that no longer fears its king, and a king who no longer fears himself." "Do you still have nightmares?" "Sometimes." His hand tightened around hers. "But they end differently now. I wake, and you are there, and the fear cannot hold me. You taught me that. You showed me that the past does not have to own the future." The child made a sound of contentment, and they both looked down at her. They had named her Aurora, for the dawn that had come into both their lives, and for the sister Caspian had lost, the one whose memory he could finally speak of without drowning in grief. Seraphina thought of the journey that had brought her here, the betrayal that had shattered her, the cold that had nearly killed her, the king who had carried her from the snow and let her carry him from his own frozen prison. Two broken people who had found each other in the wilderness and chosen to heal together. The past did not disappear. She still carried scars from Garrick's betrayal, still sometimes woke in the night with her heart racing. And Caspian still carried the weight of what he had done to survive, still sometimes grew distant when memories pressed too close. But they carried these things together now, and the burden was lighter for being shared. "I was broken," she said quietly, "shattered into pieces I did not think could ever be put back together." Caspian stopped walking. He turned to face her, his winter blue eyes soft with a warmth no one else would ever see. "You put me back together first, every piece, one by one, and in doing so, you found your own." She smiled, the expression no longer unfamiliar on a face that had known so much sorrow. "We built something new, something stronger than what came before." He kissed her then, there in the summer garden with their daughter between them. The kiss was tender, a promise renewed, a future claimed. When they parted, Aurora made a sound of protest at being momentarily ignored, and they both laughed. In the distance, wolves howled. Not a warning, but a celebration. The pack recognizing its new queen. The kingdom welcoming its future. The world that had been so cold and cruel, now offering warmth and possibility. Seraphina leaned into Caspian's embrace and let the fear finally, fully go. She had come to this place broken and dying, carrying a child she thought she would have to protect alone. She had found instead a partner, a purpose, a love that had grown not from supernatural compulsion, but from the simple, profound act of two wounded people choosing to heal each other. She had saved him as much as he had saved her. That was the truth the story had taught her. Healing was never one way. It was a dance, a collaboration, a mutual gift that grew stronger the more it was shared. The pieces were back together now. Different from what they had been, shaped by everything she had survived, but whole, complete, home.